All right. Well, everybody, again, welcome to the Forest Specialist Series. I'm Greg Goodland with the Rio Grande National Forest, and on behalf of the Rio Grande and our partners at the San Juan Mountains Association, I welcome you to this wonderful installment of Forest Specialist Series. Yeah, it's going to be a great one, and we just have a little housekeeping to do to start with. So I'm going to introduce you to Kelly DeFi from San Juan Mountains Association, and on your screen, you'll see her as VIS coordinator. She's going to go through a few things that'll help us get through this and have some fun tonight. Here you go, Kelly.
Okay, so just the typical housekeeping. We'd like to ask you to stay on mute unless you're going to ask a question. Raise your hand. You can do that in the reactions button down at the bottom, or you can put it in the chat, which it looks like a little speech bubble. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, we have the door prize. This is actually one of Sandra's books, Hidden History of the Upper Rio Grande. So if you'd like a chance at winning the copy, go ahead and put your name in the chat. And if you would like to stay updated on future Forest Specialist Series events, then you can send me your email in a private chat. To do that, in the chat bar or in the chat window, you click on the button that says everyone, and it should open to, you can pick whoever you'd like to chat with and just pick the VIS coordinator. That'd be me. And you can just give me your email address privately. So, and I think that's all of our housekeeping. So we'll turn the time to Sandra.
Well, wait a minute. One
Oh,
more
what did I
thing.
forget?
We kind of wanted to mention what we got going next month.
That's true.
So yeah, we before we get started, we always like to mention early on and then at the end again what we have brewing for the following month. And next month, it looks like it's going to be Matt Huber from the Colorado Avalanche Information Center that will do. I think this will be his third session with us. So this is pretty exciting. And with that, I guess I'll turn it over to our guest tonight, Sandra Wagner. Welcome. We sure appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you, Greg. In the PSA, I wanted to make sure everyone knew that I was or I am, hopefully still in my heart, a chemist. So I'm not a biologist, I'm not a fisheries person, but I was fortunate enough to marry into a family who were multi-generation fishery people. So that got me very interested in this. And I hope in this discussion tonight that you'll see some interesting things that you didn't know about either. And Kelly didn't mention, but I would like this to be a discussion. I'm probably not going to be really good about being able to manage chats and hands, although Kelly said she would help me. But if you have a question or a comment, just feel free to go ahead and jump in. I certainly won't be offended. So I'm assuming everybody's seeing the presentation.
We can see it now, but you might want to start the slideshow. There you go. That looks more official.
That looks a little better. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
The Wills camping party returned from Antelope Park the first of the week after a stay of 10 days. There were over 30 in the party, and they caught 2,400 fish. The Center Post Dispatch, 1889. I'm having trouble seeing my slide here. There we go, 1899. Sorry about that. So this is the Wills family. So the men would gather up the ladies of the families and all the kids and pack up the wagons with canning kettles and stoves and crocks and jars and head up to the mountains for several days, where the men would proceed to catch and clean fish and the women would preserve them, probably in a variety of ways. They would pickle them, they would can them, and then they would salt them in crocks. Probably not any fish drying, but I'm starting this presentation to demonstrate that at the turn of the century, fish were an extremely important protein source to the people of primarily Colorado and also the country, because there weren't egg farms, there weren't chicken farms, there weren't feedlots to provide other sources of protein. The title is about fish culturists of the Upper Rio Grande, and I think we've got some people from Texas, and so if you talk to people from Texas, things in the Upper Rio Grande is probably north of Santa Fe. If you live in the San Luis Valley and you want to talk about the Upper Rio Grande, you're talking about Creed and up. So let me orient you just a little bit with this map, if I can find my mouse. Antonito, Southern Colorado, Durango, Silverton, Creed. So there were many, many fisheries in the early days. McIntyre, Lahara, Del Norte, Humphreys, Federal Hatcheries, and then this whole group of what is the very upper end of the Upper Rio Grande. And we're going to talk about those, and then we're going to go down the Rio Grande just a little bit and talk about what was going on along Goose Creek. The dotted line is the Continental Divide, and I will make mention of a couple things along the Pine River that runs down to Bayfield, and there were a couple hatcheries, the Emerald Lake and, excuse me, the Wits End hatcheries. This is an aerial view of what I call the classic Upper Rio Grande. If you've been up Forest Service Road 520 or the Rio Grande Reservoir Road, you drive right along the Road Canyon Reservoir. You follow the road, eventually going past the Rio Grande Reservoir. Lost Lakes feeds into the Rio Grande Reservoir. Reagan Lake, and if this is called Finger Mesa, so you see this series of mesas and then the valleys between them, and the valleys typically, of course, have lakes in them. Then we have the S. Lacy U Lakes, Hermit Lakes, Browns Lake, and Pearl Lakes, and we'll be speaking about each of those in a little bit of detail. Some history. As early as 1866, a gentleman named Gordon Land established the first commercial fishery in Conneaus County. He also became the Colorado Fish Commissioner in 1889. In 1885, the Patrick brothers established rainbow trout hatcheries on the Pine River outside Durango, and we already looked at the map to see where the Pine River was. In 1888, the Durango Rod and Gun Club seined Colorado River cutthroats and packed them up to Emerald Lake in the Pine River. In 1895, the Durango hatcheries provided cutthroat trout to stock public waters throughout the state of Colorado. So fish were on the move. So as we saw from the first slide, probably overfishing was becoming a serious issue. In 1903, the Colorado State Game and Fish, and those people have changed their name so many times, forgive me if it's not the correct current one, outlawed non-licensed hunters and fisheries. The next year, they provided funds to establish private commercial fisheries to produce eyed eggs, raise fry for sale, and produce dressed fish for commercial markets. So let's explain and make sure everyone understands eyed eggs. When eggs are first taken from the fish, they're called green eggs, and they're very fragile and delicate. Once they've been fertilized and allowed to grow a little bit and look and have developed an eye within the egg, they kind of become like almost basketballs. They're pretty tough and durable. I mean, they still need to be kept wet and cool, but you can do a lot of things with eyed eggs that you could never do with a green egg. A little bit about fish life stages. And again, I am not a biologist, so this is going to be pretty high level description. And I put temperature in parentheses because anyone involved with the management of fish, growing fish, understands that fish are temperature dependent. If they're kept in pretty cool water all the time, they grow slowly. If the warmer the water, they grow more quickly. So once they're hatched, they're called larvae, or there's some other names for them as well. They live off their yolk sac, and that takes a few days to happen. Then they're called fry. And these are independent little fish, fully absorbed yolk sac. They can eat on their own. And this can last from a few to several months, depending on water conditions and the type of fish. Then a category, they're called fingerling or juveniles. And this is a transition from fry to being fully reproductive, mature adults. In the early 1900s, the Upper Rio Grande produced more than 60 tons of dressed fish per year. And almost all of those fish went out of the area and went over to the Front Range, to Denver and the other big cities. There were 39 licensed commercial fishermen, and this area of Colorado was a major commercial dressed fish and egg producing area of Colorado. So we're talking about eyed eggs. Charlie Mason was a brother-in-law of the 5 Wetherill brothers who investigated and did tours of the ancient ruins around Mesa Verde. And he liked to do that, but he said, you know, there's probably more to life than doing this. So he decided he wanted to become a fishery person. And he came to the Upper Rio Grande and in 1896 homesteaded land on South Clear Creek and built and raised dams on a series of small lakes with his brother-in-law, Clayton Wetherill. Charlie received the first patented homestead for the sole purpose of raising trout for market. So when you say homestead, you think homestead, well, you know, Little House on the Prairie or something. People were having farms or raising animals. There were also timber homesteads. This happened to be a trout homestead. He also received the first Colorado license for raising trout for market. The bottom left is Charlie. The top left is Charlie again with one of his many grandsons, and of course, the ubiquitous fish. And the right is the Mason homestead at Hermit Lakes, which was the name of his property. So when he got there, he was not impressed with the local native fish, the rainbows and cutthroats. He said, man, yeah, those, you know, they grow slowly. They, you know, they're just not really something I want to have in my fishery. So his good friends, the Patrick brothers, over on the Pine River, and they knew the Patrick brothers because they were all explorers in the desert Southwest for several years, and then they all got into fisheries. So he rode over and got a bunch of Colorado River cutthroats from Emerald Lake and brought them over to Hermit Lakes, and they said, no, we don't like living here. This isn't our thing. And when I got on the internet to get this lovely fish picture, I read a little article about biologists looking for a pure strain of Colorado River cutthroat, and they found some in the small tributaries around Emerald Lake. So probably brought there years ago by the Patrick brothers. Pretty fish. But what were successful were eastern brook trout. They grew fast, they were hardy, they were not sickly, they were easy to manage in terms of having to move fish around. Excuse me. In 1901, he imported 100,000 eastern brook trout eggs from Plymouth, Massachusetts. They absolutely flourished. They just really did great there. So the next year, he imported about 200,000 eggs. And Charlie Mason's fishery became the source of brook trout in the Upper Rio Grande. By 1920, years of hard work and altitude took their toll, so he and his wife retired to Washington. So in the summer, in the nighttime, you put out your gill nets. In the morning, you drug them in. You killed and dressed the fish. You packed them in the ice that you cut during the winter, and you put them either on a cart or something to get them to Creede to the train to take to Denver. When his daughter inherited Hermit Lakes, she said, oh, if you think I'm dressing another fish in my life, think again. So she converted Hermit Lakes into a sportsman's club. And Hermit Lakes Trout Club is now a private fishing club that spans several lakes. They have full-time caretakers. It's about 800 acres with many, many cabins. Brooks are now ubiquitous throughout the San Juans. They got there primarily because Charlie and Clayton packed them to remote mountain lakes and streams. Now, this picture is not Charlie and Clayton. This is Clayton's youngest son, Carol, in the dark jacket, and they're packing cans of fry onto horses so they can pack them up to their destination. This is probably a little better picture to show the fish cans tied on the horses, and each one carried two, one on each side. And they had a screen on the top that allowed air to get in. So as the horse walked and the water sloshed around in the can, it aerated it enough to keep the little fry alive inside the can. The biggest challenge of doing this was that as the sun shone on the can and the warmth of the horse's body warmed the water inside the can, when you got up to the location you were going to put the fry in the high mountains, the water was very cold. So it had to be a very slow, gradual process where you let a little bit of cold water in the can and slowly equilibrated the temperatures so that the little fry wouldn't die of shock when you dumped them into the water. So we've talked some about Charlie Mason. Let's talk a little bit about Clayton Wetherill. Again, he was with his brothers that explored around Mesa Verde and throughout the desert Southwest. But Creede became his home. He was the Mineral County Justice of the Peace and a commissioner in 1913. And he also started the San Juan Wetherill Fish Hatchery. And he raised only brookies. If you have driven up Forest Service Road 520 or the Rio Grande Reservoir Road, you will have driven right by Clayton's hatchery. The hatchery part was in the lower stone part of the building that you can see, and the living quarters were above. And there was a very little warmish, not warm, but stream coming through the basement that allowed him to take eggs from the nearby lakes, green eggs, bring them back to his hatchery, eye them out, and hatch fry. So this would have been millions of eggs that they processed through there. And once that was done, then Clayton was free to head back to the Southwest if that's what he was going to do. But this was not a year-round activity. It was not a fishery per se. It was just a hatchery. And I'll do it for you. Okay, so we talked about taking green eggs and bringing them back to the hatchery. The other nice thing about brookies were they very politely spawned in the fall, and they not to compete with the rainbows and cutthroats that spawned in the spring. And this was a rather delicate process because you had the eggs from the fish, and they had to be taken and packed in crates that had brass screens that were lined with either felt or moss, a layer of eggs, and then snow packed over them to keep them cold till they got to the hatchery. And I have an expert here in taking eggs from mountain lakes, and I will allow him to make his story here.
I'm not sure I'm an expert, but we used to take eggs at Lost Lakes with my grandfather, Carol Wetherill. And we'd do it in the spring because we were just doing cutthroat eggs is all we'd take. We'd try over 1 or 2 trips to take 1 million eggs out of Lost Lakes. And with the green egg, you have maybe 8 to 10 hours after you fertilize it to get it down and get it into an incubator to where you won't touch it again until it eyes up. And at that time, you can tell which ones died. They'll be white, and you can pick them out because if you don't, they'll get fungus on them and destroy your whole crop. But while you're up there, you can see that taking eggs in the fall is looks like cold business. Well, you do it in the spring at Lost Lakes. And I know my grandfather thought he had a wimp for a grandson, because I would stop after 2 or 3 hours of my hands in that cold ice water and go build a fire and stand there for a while. And he would just keep stripping fish, and it never bothered him as cold as it got up there. But we'd do that, and then we'd have, like I say, 6 to 10 hours to get him out of there and up to his place in Saguache or our place down by Monte Vista.
Thank you. So not a mechanical process. Everything was done by hand. A couple other fisheries were the S. Lazy U and Lake Cliff Dude Ranch, that were two almost adjoining lakes that were established by the Wills brothers in 1920, and the same type of operation, gill nets out at night and brought in the morning to process the fish. In 1973, the S. Lazy U converted to a private nonprofit fishing club on about 80 acres with about 25 cabins. And next door, the Lake Cliff Dude Ranch is now the Wilderness Christian Youth Camp. So these are both private fishing now. Then Brown's Lake. Earl Brown homesteaded lakes in 1901, and he married Charlie Mason's daughter, Ellis. And he also only raised brook trout. And as we said before, the winters were spent cutting ice off the lakes and storing it so you could ship fish in the summer. Brown's Lake is now a public fishing lake and maintained by the state of Colorado. You cannot speak about fishing on the Upper Rio Grande fisheries without talking about Bert Husselkuss. He was an amazing entrepreneur. He had just a vision to see what could be done with fish. He was, in the early days, he was a stagecoach driver out of Del Norte, and he identified areas that he thought would be good fishing lakes. So Lost Lakes and Road Canyon. A lot of the early lakes were built as water storage to send down to the San Luis Valley, as was the case with Road Canyon. Husselkuss bought it in 1912 and started his fish business. Well, it was a pretty shallow lake. And so in 1913, he raised the dam. And if you look at the picture here, you will see the horses pulling Fresnos and slips, basically lowering the level of the lake and building up the dam. Regardless, Road Canyon reservoirs are not deep, and only the lowermost reservoir actually has fish in it. The upper one is just for water storage. He had a large family, and one of his sons took it over. And in 1873, he leased it to the Division of Wildlife. Again, I don't know what exactly that alphabet soup was at that time, but they eventually purchased it and converted it to public fishing. A couple of years ago, I worked on a project with the funding from History Colorado and the concurrence of the U.S. Forest Service. And there are a series of interpretive signs from Highway 149 up to Grassy Hill by the pass. And there is a sign there at the Road Canyon reservoirs which describes the history of the Husselkuss occupation there. He had an extremely successful fishing business. He shipped these very durable eyed eggs throughout the world. And his dressed fish, like most of the other fisheries, were sent to the Denver markets. He experimented with a lot of different types of fish. I'm not sure. The kamloops and the steelhead, I believe, are migratory fish. So of course, they didn't like it at all. He also brought in brown trout, and they thrived and did well, but the local fishermen didn't like them because they were pretty aggressive fish and they were hard to manage. So they really weren't popular. German tench. and I don't, of course, a lot of you folks are fish people, so you might recognize this. They were highly successful. It allowed Hustle Cuss to ship up to 2 tons of fish every 2 weeks. And if you haven't seen a tench, this is a lovely picture where things aren't the prettiest. The description says tench thrive best in enclosed preserved waters with a clay or muddy bottom and with abundant vegetation. Well, if you've ever fished at Road Canyon, you will say, yes, that's exactly the type of water that is there. So the tench thrive there. This picture is about a 12.5-pound tench in the United Kingdom. The record for tench in Colorado is actually in Home Lake in Monte Vista, and it was a 5.5-pound fish. Hustle Cuss also had lost lakes, and that is, it's pretty remote and isolated, and it was developed into a rainbow fishery. It has always been private fishing and has various leases throughout the time. It's owned now by the 4UR Ranch. You can go fishing up there, I believe, if you contact the Rio Grande anglers in Creed. I believe they have an agreement with the 4UR to take paying customers up to Lost Lakes. However, it has not really been maintained as a fishery for several years. And of course, like everywhere else, there are brookies and other fish in the lakes there. The Rio Grande Reservoir, that large dam was completed in 1912, creating about 4 miles of lake. A couple years later, the state issued a lake license to Farmers Union, which is now the San Luis Valley Irrigation District, which prohibited public fishing. Well, people didn't like that very well. So it is now a public fishing spot. There's an agreement between the San Luis Valley Irrigation District and the Colorado Parks and Wildlife that maintains a survival pool in the reservoir with enough water to keep the fish that are there alive. Then the last of the Upper Rio Grande Corps, Frank Swank, homesteaded Castle Lakes in 1909. He worked with Mason and Hustle Cuss to stock brook trout, and he seined for market in Lake City because he was very far over on the western side. Today, Pearl Lakes is a private nonprofit fishing club, and the name has been changed to Pearl Lakes. Let's go down the Rio Grande a little bit to Goose Creek. Let me orient you on the map a little bit here. The white line is Highway 149. South Fork would be over here. Greed is up here. The blue is the Rio Grande River, and the blue here is Goose Creek. The yellow is the 4UR Ranch, and you'll notice it follows Goose Creek. When General Palmer first started developing his resort, it was a hot springs resort for people with tuberculosis and other types of incurable diseases. But as people quickly discovered, the fishing was amazing. So Palmer started buying up homesteads. And when people had homesteaded here, of course, they're going to homestead along the creek where the land is better and there's a better chance of grass to grow. So he bought up all these homesteads and ended up with this kind of funky land structure here along Goose Creek. At the very upper end of Goose Creek is the Humphreys Ranch, and I have an expanded picture of that here. You see Goose Creek coming up, and Lake Humphreys, Haypress Lake, and it is fed by a small stream called Roaring Fork. So this is not the Roaring Fork that people might be familiar with on the western slope, but it is a small stream that feeds Lake Humphreys, and it is in the wilderness. Pretty cool picture. This is the Goose Creek Valley along the 4UR property. You can see the creek here, runs around here, and then up through the middle part of the valley, up. This is one of the old barns. This is staff housing. The actual lodge and resort, the hot springs are all in this general area here. So not really fishing along here, not a fishery, but the general had a hatchery, which he also contributed fish to Goose Creek. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of references about fish activities around the 1900s, and I just picked a couple of them, which I thought were interesting. 2,000 rainbow trout were planted in Goose Creek. General Palmer placed an order with Hustle, Cuss, and Mason for all the eastern brook trout eggs that they will hatch this year, which would have been several million, to be put in Goose Creek at the Wagon Wheel Gap Resort. Then the general had his hatchery up and running, and he, with eggs from elsewhere, put in about 7 million eggs into Goose Creek. Now, did this mean that all these hatched into fish? My goodness gracious. Well, absolutely not. So if they're putting eggs in fast-moving water, they're going to get beat up by the water. They're going to get eaten by other fish. So the survival rate of eggs was pretty small. So you put in a lot, hoping that some of them would actually survive. Now, we talked about what essentially was overfishing. People, there were no controls. People could come up and take as many fish as they wanted. Hopefully, a lot of them were took care of the fish and actually preserved them, but I'm sure there were a lot of wasted fish in those days. So finally, in 1917, the state of Colorado issued some regulations about fishing. Trout and grayling, none less than 7 inches, gives some dates of altitude lakes. 15 pounds in any one calendar day. Well, I think 15 pounds is really still a whole lot of fish, and 20 pounds in possession at one time. And then one of the biggies was they required that people have a fishing license. Well, these were pretty significant requirements for people that had spent their life just doing basically whatever they wanted. The 4UR guest ranch fishing, and it is it's closed to the public, but of course, if you're a guest there, it's a guest ranch. You can fish in their amazing stream. Through the efforts of many people over the years, fishing has been maintained. We talked about the minimal survival rate for millions of eggs and the fry released. So some people established nursing ponds along the creeks, which would be a place where eggs and fry could mature and grow without being beaten up by the rushing stream or having other bigger fish come and prey upon them, give them a chance to grow up, and then they could be released into the creeks. Catchable fish were stocked into Goose Creek in the mid-1900s, and the owners over the years gradually limited the amount of fish to be taken until today, when it's catch and release only. So there are stories of guests at the 4UR, even if they had a limited amount of fish. There weren't refrigerators in the room, so every evening a bucket of ice would be brought to each of the rooms so people could have drinks or whatever they wanted to do with it. And some nefarious folks would take that ice and put it in the bathtub, and then they would store their fish in there until they were ready to leave. So move to catch and release only. Another amazing, and I had the privilege to work on a book about A.E. Humphreys this past year. And I entitled this slide, A.E. Humphreys equals fish. He was a very successful businessman. He had started out in timber and coal. He was one of the scions of mining and Creed for many years. And then his final fortune was in the Mejia, Texas oil fields. But in his heart of hearts, he was a fisherman. He was the first president of the Walton League in Denver. And if you are not familiar, Isaac Walton wrote a book called The Complete Angler. And yes, I do know how to spell complete, but it used to be spelled like this in 1653. And this was really considered to be the first book on recreational fishing. So in the 1920s, a group of wealthy Chicago businessmen got together and said, you know, the poor fish are just being overfished, their environment is being damaged, and so they created the Walton League, which is still around today as an environmental action organization. So Humphreys was the first president of the Denver chapter of the Walton League. And there at the head of Goose Creek, he created his own fisherman's paradise. Humphreys Lodge is a private family estate. This is Albert Edmond at his oil field in Texas. And that is Vice President Dawes. So he had some very important national connections. This is an aerial view of Humphreys Lodge. This is Lake Humphreys. There is his hatchery. These are the buildings he had built. There's a lodge, there's a recreation room, and there's a dining hall. Then he has outbuildings, cabins for the staff and the caretaker. This is the spillway out of Humphreys Lake going down into Goose Creek. The dam, this 90-foot concrete dam, was certainly a major undertaking of his. And this is all about, I think it's 9,400 feet in elevation. So it's pretty high. This is a modern picture of Humphreys Lake with the recreation room. And then there are other buildings you can kind of see bits and pieces of that lead down to the lake. So with that 90-foot dam, this lake is going to be, it's not going to be like Road Canyon. This is a deep lake. And I'm violating every rule on public speaking that I've ever learned, but this is just such an important statement of Humphreys and really describes his passion for fish. I will stock only cutthroat trout, no brook. I shall raise enough to stock Goose Creek and the Rio Grande. I will put in 1 million fry at once and am planting freshwater shrimp on which they thrive near Del Norte in the lakes to feed the young trout. This shrimp multiplies, they say, and fish love it. I will have my own hatchery. It is built and ready. And he did. My nursery lake will be the next step, then the two big lakes, Haypress and Humphreys, where millions of trout will live. Thousands are sure to go over the spillways into Goose Creek and the Rio Grande, which is right, for I want to see the trout streams of Colorado again in the glory they had before they were fished out. I intend to help. And he did. Millions of dollars did he. He provided the state and various fishing organizations to stock fish and create nursery ponds. This was in 1922. Sadly, he was involved in the Teapot Dome affair. Not that he was ever particularly accused of any wrongdoing, but some of his friends clearly were, and he was ready to be called to Congress to testify, and he committed suicide in 1927. So sadly, he wasn't able to enjoy the fruits of his labors. This is a fish caught by one of the staff that work at Humphreys this past summer. And Marty, I sent you a note. Can you identify the fish for us? I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, it has the colorations of a rainbow, but I'm sorry, Sandy, I just don't know.
Okay, well, Bill didn't either. Okay, thank you, I appreciate it. But anyway, because of this deep lake and it gets virtually no fishing pressure, there are some very big fish in Humphreys Lake. A few years ago, the Forest Service and the Colorado Parks and Wildlife had a project to reestablish Rio Grande cutthroat in the Upper Rio Grande. Now, this was a cooperative project with the Humphreys Lodge folks. And of course, they were interested in it because this was reestablishing cutthroat, and that's what their great-grandfather was so supportive of. So this took 2 years of killing all the local fish, of course, the invasive brookies and natives, in that little Roaring Fork stream. Being this was a wilderness, the Forest Service hired Bill Getz to take his mules and drag a sled in to carry all the materials, chemicals and whatever, to kill the fish in the stream. And this again took a couple of summers to get all the fish killed. Bill happens to be the great-grandson of Clayton Wetherill. So 100 years before, his great-grandfather was hauling brooks into the Upper Rio Grande. Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. Excuse me. And here, a little over 100 years later, his great-grandson is using mules to try to kill fish, brookies, in the Upper Rio Grande. So by necessity, to keep this at a reasonable length, I've just touched briefly on a lot of these things, but if you're interested in more detail, certainly email me. But there are several references that you might find of interest. The first is Hidden History of the Upper Rio Grande, and Kelly's already showed you that book I wrote with my mother-in-law, Carol Ann Wetherill, in 2017. Then more recently, a book on the 4UR Ranch at Wagon Wheel Hot Springs that came out in 2020. An excellent book by Glenn Hinshaw, who was a former wildlife officer in the Creed area, called Crusaders for Wildlife, that came out in 2000. In the Shadow of Mesa Verde, Clayton Wetherill, which I'm working on getting published. And then the last is Humphreys Lodge, 100 Years. And I was contacted by Darcy Brown, who's the great-granddaughter of A.E. Humphreys, to write a book for their 100th anniversary, which we did. And it was provided for the family, and it was so popular, well, at least that's what we think, that we are revising it, and it will be available as a public book here in this coming year. So that concludes my presentation for tonight. I thank you all for your attention, and nobody asked any questions, so I'm certainly at the point to taking questions now. And I'm back. Greg, anything?
Oh man, I always have questions. This was enthralling. Admittedly, Sandra, I typically do some work while I'm doing this, and in like 3/4 listen. I haven't been able to do anything. This is really neat.
Oh, good.
I drove by going up to the Rio Grande and Road Canyon. I particularly like to fish at Road Canyon because of that warm, cloudy water that you talk about, and the fish do get significantly larger there.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I wanted to say I really, really liked the idea of those larger fish, and so you explained why they're getting there. So I'm going to go with a couple of questions in the chat now, unless Kelly, you have something you want to add before we do that.
No, let's go ahead and see. Let's get these questions in the chat answered.
Cool. So what was the Teapot Dome affair?
Oh, well, that was, that's a little bit complicated. It's in my book, but it was during the Warren Harding administration, and Mr. Henry Sinclair of Sinclair Oil and a couple of his cronies hatched this deal with some of the people in Harding's administration, where they would buy oil from the naval reserves and take it into their companies and sell it for more money, pocketing millions of dollars. So it was a huge scandal, and a lot of people accused Harding of knowing that it was going on. And Humphreys was going to be their prime witness, but of course he killed himself before he could ever testify. So it kind of felt like the case kind of fell apart. But you can certainly look at Google the Teapot Dome affair, and the Teapot Dome was in Wyoming. That's where the oil reserves were. Any German tench yet present in the San Luis Valley? You know, I don't know that I can answer that. Over the years, excuse me, maybe my husband can.
The only place that they were in the valley was in Home Lake, and that dried up a couple of years ago, so I'm sure there's none left now. There's water in it again now, but I don't think they reintroduced them.
In fact, I think that DOW has been stocking that the last couple of years now, because I think a couple of organizations are bringing kids out there to fish. So I think you're missing an E. Is that Steve? You got your hand up.
Yeah, it's Stev actually.
Stev, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So to introduce myself, I am the local fish biologist for Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
Oh no! Well, I hope I didn't offend you.
No, you're doing great. It was a great presentation. Thank you so much. Love the pictures. Love the history. Really good presentation. Just thought I'd chime in on the tench real quick.
Cool.
We do find them. They're still around. Yeah, Home Lake dried up a couple years ago. I don't think they're in Home Lake anymore. But we do still find them on the river and some of the backwaters and some of the ponds. Mainly in that lower section, kind of downstream of Del Norte, around Monte Vista in that area. Very few and far between, but they are hanging on.
Right on, Steph. Thanks for coming on. That's awesome. You know, I'm the kind of guy that'll, when I'm out fishing, I'll be the one that catches one of those tench, and I'll be like, "Oh God, what happened here?"
It's the first time I sampled one. That's how it went.
Right.
Cool.
Cool. Hey, let's keep going with some questions. Charlie asked, "Is the Wagon Wheel Gap you mentioned between South Fork and Creed?"
Yes. Yes.
It's where Cottonwood Cove.
Right past Cottonwood Cove.
And then does Goose Creek run by there?
Yes, Goose Creek. Goose Creek comes in right at Wagon Wheel Gap. Yeah.
That's it. And that's on the, what would be the west side of the gap there, right?
It's the east side of the gap.
Is it? Okay. That's,
yeah.
I'm confused. Fair enough. Let's see. I thought there was another one. Oh yeah. Was Sourd Ranch part of this?
You know, that's kind of the answer to your question is no. But I've been, I adopted a couple dogs to the Sourd folks here in the past year, and they have an amazing history. So I've really been pushing them to write their own story because I think it would really be fascinating. So the short answer is no. But they did have fisheries as well as most people did.
That's awesome. Hey, Jason, I see your hands up. Come on board.
Hey, Sadie, another fish biologist here, or at least a small fish biologist from the Forest Service. You said you had a special guest. I assume it's Bill, but I didn't know for sure from the voice.
Yeah.
Was talking about moving the fish. That's who that was?
Yes.
Okay. Thought it'd just be good to introduce him because you had a picture of him as well, pulling his mules. So I remember that day.
Well, the mule was pulling Nate. I was pulling the mule.
Isn't that the way it goes, right?
Yeah.
I
was just recently looking for that picture for my Forest Service archives and I couldn't find it, but I have it somewhere. That day we had to pull all that equipment into the Roaring Fork. So
I have more. Let me know.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Well, I think that satisfied all the questions that were put in the chat. So please, anybody else that's got questions, I love this interactive part of this. So come on, just click your camera on and ask away. We won't get her in this environment again until next year, maybe. I have to do this 7 seconds of silence, Sandra. I told my boss, Dan Dallas, who I'm sure you know well. Yeah, in the business
I have
world.
I have a question.
All right, David, you saved me.
Yeah. So I'm president of an FFI club down in Texas. Will this be available to use so we could use it for a program?
Yes, I'll take that answer. Yeah, we record it and then we post all of our Forest Specialist series videos on YouTube. So you'll have to give me a couple of days before I can get it up. But then if you just Google or if you just search Forest Specialist series, you should be able to find it. And I'll try to put up a post on our Facebook page to let you know when I get it up.
Thank you very much.
David, I've just put our Forest Specialist series page in the chat there for you, and it'll be posted on that page when she has that available. I expect that one will get watched quite a bit, so this is great.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, I don't have any more questions, which is kind of unusual because I usually ask quite a few, but geez, you did a good job wowing me, so I sure appreciate it, and we'll hold out for any additional questions for folks. And how about just another minute, and then we'll give it to Kelly to advise us who was the door prize winner of today. You didn't
This
put
isn't a
my
question,
name
but I got
in
a
there.
comment.
Go ahead, Jason.
So there was a commenter early on, Ashley, I think is her name. She says looks like she left, but I know that hatchery that's up on the 520 that Sandy had a picture of. You can rent that through Airbnb and stay in it. So
Well,
it's like a private property.
Well, thank you very much for bringing that up. I forgot to mention that. It used to be an Airbnb, but it has recently been purchased by two folks that it is truly a private residence now.
Oh, you're okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I'd never stayed there. Okay.
And that
I knew
just
initially
happened
it was
recently. Yeah.
okay. Well, good info. Thanks.
And it's too bad because they really did an excellent job when they renovated it to try to maintain some of the historical structure of the inside of the building. But
yeah, well, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Now they got it for themselves.
Nice. Yeah, I think that is too bad because if I'd have known that was an Airbnb, I might have just gone up there. It's,
right,
over an hour from Monte Vista. So, well, anyway, I guess we'll do kind of almost an official conclusion and have Kelly come on board and tell us who won the door prize.
Well, it was Elizabeth. And that's good because she just commented how much she enjoys reading Sandra's books. So Elizabeth, if you'll put your address into private chat with me, I will send that out to you.
Hey, that is so cool. And you guys, I certainly want to give a shout out to the San Juan Mountains Association, our invaluable partner that provides many of the door prizes, most of the door prizes. I throw one in every now and then, but I forget sometimes. So, and they also they have the Zoom program that hosts our meetings every month, and they've done that for, this is our 3rd year. So we're excited to have them as partners. Yeah, and I guess, Sandra, any last minute thoughts from you?
Well, no, I actually really appreciate the invitation because I'm not teaching at Adams State anymore, and sometimes I kind of have withdrawal, and so it was a great opportunity for me to do this, and I thank you for that.
Well, it's clear that you're no stranger to presenting information. That was wonderful. It was pretty well polished too. So we thank you so much. Again, on behalf of the San Juan Mountains Association and the Rio Grande National Forest, we sure appreciate you coming in and